I'm disgusted by you, daughter said. A week later, she apologized to me in front of the whole restaurant. When my son Nathan and his wife Amber invited me to stay with them during Logan's final year at Stanford, I said yes without thinking twice. It felt like the right thing, supporting my grandson in his last stretch of college, lending a hand in the house, maybe cooking a few meals the way Nathan liked them when he was little. It seemed sensible. Familiar. They lived in a handsome two-story house near the university, Oakline Street, rosemary hedges, quiet neighbors. Amber called it her sanctuary. I stayed in the guest suite downstairs, the one with the wide windows and thin curtains that let the early light in whether you wanted it or not. Still, I didn't complain. It was a good home. From the outside, everything looked easy. We had dinners together, pot roast, kale salad, sometimes takeout when Amber had a late meeting. I folded laundry in the afternoons, took walks to the corner store for tea biscuits. Amber always smiled when company was over. She'd thank me for my casseroles and tell her friends I was a godsend. But quiet moments held other truths. She never liked when I corrected Logan's grammar, just little things, like less instead of fewer. She'd purse her lips and pretend not to hear. And once, when I mentioned Nathan's father, my late husband, Amber shifted in her seat like I'd tracked mud through the house. They were small things. Barely things at all, maybe. A glance too long, a question ignored, a door closed gently but not slowly. But I noticed them. I always noticed. One afternoon, I came home from the market to find Amber refolding the linen I'd placed in the hallway closet. She smiled quickly, said nothing, just kept folding, crisper, tighter, with a precision that suggested I had gotten it wrong. That's when I felt it first, the subtle tension, like the quiet snap of cold in the air before a storm. And still, I stayed. Because I loved them. Or perhaps, more honestly, because I didn't know where else to go. The cardigan was soft and pilled at the elbows. I'd had it for 20 years, blue with a scalloped hem, delicate buttons shaped like daisies. Nathan once said it made me look like the kind of teacher kids remembered kindly. I wore it often that first autumn in Palo Alto, especially when the evenings turned cool and the air filled with eucalyptus. Amber hated it. She never said so outright, but the way her eyes lingered on it when I entered a room told me enough. Once, as we were leaving for Logan's fall recital, she hesitated at the door and asked if I might want to wear something a bit more polished. I looked down at my cardigan, then up at her immaculate blazer, and simply said, "This is fine." That night, Logan played beautifully. Amber clapped just a beat too long, loud and proud. I stayed seated, hands folded, a quiet smile on my face. It wasn't my moment. It was his. But I knew he noticed I was there. He scanned the crowd as he bowed, eyes pausing briefly on mine. That was enough. But things began to shift, gradually. I started finding out about family gatherings too late to attend. A cousin's birthday lunch that was just spur of the moment, a holiday brunch I apparently must have missed in the group thread. I wasn't part of any thread. They knew that. Still, Amber would smile, say, "Oh no, I thought Nathan told you," and then turn the conversation elsewhere. She began referring to me in odd ways. Once, at a garden party for a friend's engagement, I overheard her telling someone, "That's Nathan's mother. She's staying with us while Logan finishes school." Like a temporary roommate. There was laughter, light and breezy, as if I were a quirky artifact someone had inherited and didn't quite know where to place. I didn't react. I just sipped my iced tea and stared at the lemon wedge floating in the glass, counting the seconds until the party ended. Logan, bless him, never changed. He brought me fresh figs from the campus market. He helped carry groceries and always thanked me for dinner, even if he had to microwave it later. But he was young, caught between generations, eager to please. He didn't see the edges sharpening between me and his mother, or perhaps he did, and chose to pretend otherwise. One evening, as I passed his room, I heard Amber's voice, low and firm, "Don't let Grandma make you soft. She means well, but she's from another world." A pause. Then the door closed. I didn't bring it up. What would I say? That I heard her reminding my grandson not to become like me? That softness was a flaw to be avoided? I returned to my room, folded a basket of clean laundry, and sat on the edge of the bed, cardigan draped over my shoulders. I stared at the small photograph of Nathan on the nightstand, the one from his high school graduation. He wore braces then. His smile had been shy. Now, he was harder to read. Always busy. Always polite. The day before Logan's graduation, Amber asked me not to wear the cardigan. She said the restaurant was elegant and she didn't want anyone feeling underdressed. I nodded, then quietly packed it into my purse. Just in case. The restaurant was the sort with soft lighting and plates that looked more like arrangements than meals. We sat near a window, overlooking the lights of the city. Logan was beaming, Nathan relaxed, Amber poised as always. Then, between the second course and dessert, she raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. Her voice rang clear across the table. Everyone turned. To Logan, of course, she began, smiling at him, and to new beginnings. Then her eyes landed on me. And to honesty. There was a flicker in her expression then, something colder. "I'm disgusted by you," she said. Just like that. No tremble. No hesitation. The room stilled. "You've embarrassed this family for years," she continued, louder now. "You cling to the past. You undermine me in front of Logan. You talk like it's still your house, your life. But it's not. You don't belong in our world anymore." My fork hovered above my plate. I set it down carefully. Logan looked stricken. Nathan stared at the tablecloth. A couple nearby turned their heads, uncertain whether to intervene or pretend nothing had happened. I adjusted the strap of my purse, turned to the waiter, and asked quietly, "Could I have the check for my portion, please?" That was all. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I left the restaurant while the dessert menus were still being passed around. I walked 3 blocks to the train and rode home in silence, the cardigan folded neatly in my lap. Amber didn't speak to me for days afterward. Nathan apologized awkwardly, said she'd had a difficult week. Logan texted twice, brief, sweet notes. I replied to the first. Ignored the second. For the next week, I kept my distance. I left the house early each morning, returning only after dusk. I spent time in bookstores, libraries, a museum in Menlo Park. I ate alone, savoring the quiet. At home, I spoke only when spoken to. I cleaned the kitchen when no one was around. I didn't touch the laundry. I let the plants on the porch droop. I watched Amber shift in her chair, caught between her version of events and the silence she couldn't explain. She told guests I'd misunderstood her. That I was fragile, easily overwhelmed. She began planting little stories, about how I'd resisted change, clung to grief, made things complicated over the years. I said nothing. Because I wasn't broken. I was waiting. 3 mornings after the dinner, I rose before sunrise. The house was still, no thrum of the dishwasher, no muffled steps above. I boiled water for tea, wrapped my cardigan tight around me, and placed a single folded napkin beneath the cup. Always a napkin. Small dignity in the quiet. By 7 o'clock, I was in a cab bound for San Mateo. 6 months earlier, I had noticed Amber exiting a law office on El Camino. It hadn't struck me as unusual at the time. She worked in fundraising, was always attending panels, advising nonprofits. But she had emerged from that office with her head low and her phone clutched like a blade. Something about the moment had stayed with me. Later that week, when Logan mentioned he'd heard Amber on the phone sounding upset, I paid attention. I hired a private investigator. Quietly, discreetly. His name was Lewis, late 50s, wore brown suits and never looked rushed. I told him I needed help understanding someone I had trusted too long. He delivered. A folder first. Then a USB drive. Then a phone call, "I found something." You'll want to sit down before watching. Amber had a daughter. Not from Nathan. Not from anyone I'd ever heard of. She'd given birth at 15 while living with an aunt in Oregon. No one in our family knew. Not Nathan, not Logan. And certainly not me. But that wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal was what came after. Amber hadn't just placed the girl for adoption, something that might have been forgivable, understandable, even. She had, over time, severed all legal ties. And when the girl, Clara, turned 18 and began searching for her mother, Amber responded by instructing her lawyer to declare her legally unreachable. On paper, she vanished. The final blow was a video, recorded for legal documentation. Amber, sitting in a sterile office, straight-backed and cold-eyed, saying, "I don't want Clara to ever contact me again. She's not part of my future. As far as she knows, I'm dead." It was dated 6 months prior. Just before she began pushing me out of the family. I had watched that video twice. Not with anger. Not with judgment. Just with a quiet, building comprehension. Amber had erased her daughter. And she had tried to erase me. So when she arranged a follow-up brunch at the same San Francisco restaurant, an odd gesture, framed as a chance to reconnect, I agreed to come. Logan drove me. He wore a pressed shirt and brought tulips. He didn't speak much on the drive, just kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the shape of the words. We arrived just before noon. Amber wore ivory, always careful with image. Nathan looked tired, his shirt wrinkled in a way he wouldn't have allowed a year ago. Over coffee, Amber apologized for her tone at the graduation dinner. She said she'd been under pressure, that her words had come out wrong. I let her speak. I smiled at the waiter. I folded my hands gently in my lap. When dessert menus arrived, I stood. "There's something I'd like to share," I said. Nathan looked up, puzzled. Logan's eyes narrowed. Amber froze. From my handbag, I took out a tablet. I tapped the screen. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of place where forks clink and conversations pause when something shifts. And then, the video played. Amber. In an office. Speaking clearly. "I don't want Clara to ever contact me again. She's not part of my future. As far as she knows, I'm dead." The sound of her voice was unmistakable. Gasps. A fork clattered. Amber reached across the table, face flushed. No, this is out of context. You don't understand." But she could see it. In their eyes. They understood now. Nathan stared at the table. Logan sat rigid, his jaw tight. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I simply turned off the screen and placed it in my lap. Amber stood abruptly, knocking her chair. She reached for Nathan's arm, but he didn't move. "I panicked," she said. "I was a child. I didn't know how to raise a teenager. I was 29. I made mistakes, okay?" I met her eyes and said nothing. Later, Nathan asked to speak privately. We sat on a bench near the coat check. "You blindsided her," he said. "You didn't have to do it like that." "I didn't destroy your marriage," I replied. "I showed you the woman you married." He looked away, lips pressed into a thin line. That evening, Amber knocked on my door. "I panicked," she said again. "I didn't know what to do. I was young. It was complicated." I stared at her hands. Her nails were immaculate. Always had been. "You didn't just make a mistake," I said. "You erased your own child." Her face faltered. "Can you ever forgive me?" I rose, picked up the tray of folded laundry from my bed, and walked past her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shut the door. I just left her standing there, in the hallway, staring at a silence that refused to excuse her. Because some things do not get smoothed over. Not with time. Not with apology. Only with truth. The days that followed felt slower than usual, but not heavy. The house remained mostly quiet. Amber kept to the upstairs rooms, speaking in low tones behind closed doors. Nathan spent more time at the office. Logan was the only one who moved freely, coming and going with that same quiet kindness he always had. He never mentioned the brunch, but his eyes searched mine in the mornings, as if trying to see if something had truly broken. It hadn't broken. It had shifted. And that shift settled everything into a different shape. On Thursday, I made lemon muffins. Logan liked them, and I figured the scent might bring him into the kitchen. It did. He lingered by the doorway, holding a paperback he wasn't reading. "She said you ambushed her," he said quietly. I wiped flour from the counter. "Did she?" He didn't answer. Instead, he picked at a muffin's edge and said, "Was it true?" I nodded once. Logan sat down, eyes wide but unshocked. Maybe some part of him had always sensed something frayed in Amber's smile, something cautious in her warmth. He said, "I don't know how to feel about her anymore." "You don't have to feel anything just yet," I told him. "You can just sit with the truth." That night, I folded the cardigan carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't wear it as much now, not because of Amber's disapproval, but because it had served its purpose. It had been my shield, my uniform. Now I didn't need it to feel like myself. 3 weeks later, I received a message. Not from Nathan. Not from Amber. From Clara. It was short. Polite. "I'm not sure if this is really you," she'd written, "but I found your name through some old correspondence in my adoption file. I believe you might know my biological mother." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I responded. "I do. Would you like to meet?" She arrived 2 days later, driving down from Portland in a small gray car that looked like it had seen more road than rest. Clara was 24. Her eyes were deep-set, like Amber's, but there was a softness there Amber had long since lost. She looked tired, but steady. We met at a cafe near the university. She ordered black coffee and stirred it for 10 minutes without drinking it. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said. "You're not," I replied. We talked. She told me about her childhood, foster families, quiet years, letters she'd written to a mother who never answered. She said she stopped hoping at 18, but something in her still wanted to know why. I didn't try to explain Amber's choices. That wasn't my place. But I showed Clara a photograph of Logan, and then one of Nathan holding him as a baby. I told her how he used to sing in the bathtub. How he made little clay animals for school projects and once asked if the moon had a mother. She cried when I handed her a tissue. "I thought I was alone," she whispered. "You're not," I said. When she left that afternoon, I hugged her. Properly. Not politely. I told her the door was open, always. And she came back. Twice the following week. Then again on Sunday. Logan joined us that time. He and Clara sat in the garden, talking about music. He played her something on his phone, jazz, I think. She smiled in a way I hadn't seen before. Later, Logan said, "She feels like family." "She is," I replied. Nathan began to notice, of course. He saw Logan's fondness for Clara, the time he spent with her. He noticed how Logan no longer brought his girlfriend to family dinners, how he asked more questions about our past, about my husband, about decisions made long ago. Amber stayed away. I imagined her sitting in the upstairs bedroom, curtains drawn, wondering when the story stopped being hers to control. It wasn't sudden. There was no grand departure, no suitcases by the door. But the space between us expanded. The house grew quieter. And I began planning my next chapter. One morning, I mailed in the paperwork for a small cottage near Half Moon Bay, a rental with creaky floors and a garden patch out back. It had a porch swing and a short white fence. Nothing grand. But it was mine. Or would be, soon enough. When I told Logan, he looked heartbroken. But this house, he said. Was never mine, I answered. He nodded. You'll still visit? Only if you bring muffins, I said, and he smiled. The move was gentle. I didn't pack much. Just the essentials, books, photographs, the cardigan, of course. Clara helped me load the car. Logan followed in his. Nathan didn't offer. Amber didn't come downstairs. At the edge of the driveway, Clara looked back once. Do you feel sad leaving? She asked. I took one last look at the house. The front window where I used to watch for Logan to come home. The door Amber never quite held open long enough. The light that always flickered in the guest room and was never fixed. No, I said. I feel finished. We drove in silence. And in that silence, there was peace. The cottage sat at the edge of a winding road that met the sea in a hush of foam and light. It wasn't grand, just 3 rooms and a garden with too many weeds, but it was mine. The walls smelled faintly of salt and thyme. The floor creaked when I walked too fast. The porch swing sighed when the wind moved westward. I arrived with only what I needed. 2 suitcases, a small bookshelf, a tin of tea leaves, and a woven blanket Logan had given me years ago. Clara helped carry everything inside, laughing at the stubbornness of my old kettle and marveling at the slant of the light through the front window. This place feels like a beginning, she said. It is, I replied. But not mine alone. Clara began visiting every weekend. Sometimes with Logan, sometimes alone. She would bring strawberries or fresh bread. I would brew tea and tell her stories of her half-brother when he was a boy, the time he tried to build a raft in the bathtub, how he refused to sleep without his socks for a year. She laughed like someone finding pieces of a map she thought had burned long ago. Logan was quieter in those visits, more watchful. I could see him absorbing every detail, her mannerisms, the way her hand curled around a cup, how she always listened before she spoke. They looked nothing alike, yet they mirrored each other in 100 small ways. On one rainy Saturday, Clara lingered at the kitchen table long after Logan had left. I didn't think I'd ever have a place like this, she said. Somewhere I could just be. I poured her another cup of tea and said, then it's yours too. She looked at me for a long time, and in that look, I saw a kind of trust that cannot be asked for, only earned. Nathan called a few times. His voice was careful, clipped. He wanted to know how I was, whether I needed anything, if I had considered coming by the house. I answered truthfully. I'm well. I have what I need. And no, I haven't. He didn't ask again. Amber sent one card. A thin envelope with a note scrawled in blue ink. I regret the way things unfolded. I hope, in time, you'll understand. There was no return address. Just a silence posing a sentiment. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the cottage. I planted herbs. I patched the screen door. I found a library nearby and began volunteering twice a week, sorting returns, recommending quiet novels to quiet readers. I met a woman named June who crocheted hats for premature babies and insisted on teaching me. We drank weak coffee and gossiped about authors neither of us really liked. Life didn't rush. It unfolded. On Logan's birthday, Clara brought over a chocolate cake she had baked from scratch. The 3 of us sat in the living room, the wind pressing softly against the windows, the candlelight flickering on our faces. Do you think she'll ever try to contact me? Clara asked, not looking up from her plate. I don't know, I said. But I think you've found what matters already. She nodded. I'm not angry. I was. But now, I think. I just feel free. Logan reached over and gently touched her hand. They sat like that, quietly, and I felt something settle in the room, a kind of quiet grace, a stillness earned. Not long after, Clara asked if I'd help her find a small place nearby. She wanted to stay close. Said the air felt better here, and she had begun sketching again. She brought over her notebook one afternoon, lines of sea cliffs, birds, wind-whipped trees. She had talent. Not polished, not formal. But honest. We found her a studio above an old bookstore. She moved in with 2 suitcases and a cat named Ivy who didn't like anyone but tolerated me. Our Sundays became routine: coffee, muffins, long walks down to the rocky shore. Logan joined when he could. Other times, it was just Clara and me, 2 women piecing together a new kind of family, one that didn't need permission or approval to exist. Sometimes, I would sit on the porch after they'd left and think about the house in Palo Alto. I wondered if Amber ever stood at the kitchen window, thinking of the brunch, the video, the moment the curtain lifted. I wondered if she felt shame or just inconvenience. But I didn't dwell. That was the difference now. I could think of those things without being pulled under. Because here, in the soft creak of the swing, the smell of rosemary and sea, the laughter echoing faintly from the studio down the road, I had chosen something better. Not revenge. Not righteousness. Just peace. Earned the hard way, and sweeter for it. Summer rolled in slowly, thick with salt air and the hum of distant waves. The cottage bloomed at the edges, tiny purple flowers pushing through the cracks near the gate, bees settling lazily on the rosemary bush. Clara painted the window frames pale yellow one afternoon while I baked peach scones. Logan arrived later that evening with a second-hand stereo and a record of Nina Simone that crackled like firelight when played. In these quiet weeks, life arranged itself without effort. I no longer waited for calls that never came. I stopped checking my calendar for family events I hadn't been invited to. I stopped counting the ways I'd been useful. I began counting something else: moments of stillness, of laughter, of unexpected kindness. One Thursday morning, while sorting books at the library, June handed me a slim envelope. "For you," she said. Came through the library mail. It was addressed in a shaky hand. No return address. Inside, a note. 8 words in faded ink. She's asking questions. Should she know the truth? No signature. Just those words. I read it twice. Then tucked it into my bag and didn't mention it. That evening, Clara came by. She brought fresh basil from her windowsill garden and a sketch she'd made of Logan, laughing beside the sea. We ate pasta and talked about nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about the note. She, I assumed, was Clara. Someone, perhaps from Amber's past, or from the firm, had seen the new shape of things. Had guessed. Had wondered. And yes, Clara should know the truth. But not from a stranger. That night, I sat with her on the porch. "There's more I haven't told you," I said. She didn't flinch. Just waited. I told her about Amber's choice. About the false papers. The legal vanishing. The way she had rewritten history to preserve her reflection in other people's eyes. "She told the courts you were a danger to her peace of mind," I said. "She asked never to be found." Clara nodded once, slowly. Then stood and walked to the edge of the porch. The wind tugged at her shirt. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "She said she loved me once. I remember that part. Just that one time. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She simply turned, came back to the bench, and took my hand. 'Thanks for telling me,' she said. 'Now I can let it go properly.' The next day, she drove to the coast alone. She said she needed the ocean. When she returned, she carried a small jar of sand and a folded letter addressed to A. Whitaker. I never asked if she'd mailed it. She never said. Logan, meanwhile, seemed changed by it all, gentler, maybe. Less eager to perform warmth for others, more rooted in his own truth. He called often, came by when he could. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Just sat on the steps, watched the fog roll in, let the day end without needing it to mean anything more. In mid-July, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from Nathan. He wrote by hand. "Mom. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought things would smooth over. That time would blur the edges. But I see now that what happened wasn't a crack, it was a reveal. I didn't protect you. I let comfort become complicity. I let her words stand. I'm sorry. Logan talks about you and Clara often. He's different lately. Lighter. I don't know what our family looks like now, but I know it's not what I thought it was. I hope we can talk sometime. With love. Nathan. I read it once. Then again. I didn't write back. But I kept the letter. Not because I needed it. But because it told me something he couldn't say aloud, that he'd finally seen me clearly. Clara got a job in a nearby gallery. She invited me to her first showing. I stood in a room of strangers watching people admire her sketches of coastal houses, wildflower fields, crooked fences. One drawing caught my eye, a porch with a cardigan draped over a rocking chair. She didn't point it out. But I knew. That night, we sat by her small fireplace eating leftover quiche and laughing about her cat's sudden hatred of lavender. You're the only reason I came here, she said softly. And now I never want to leave. Sometimes life gives you back what you lost. Sometimes it gives you something new entirely. And sometimes, it gives you someone who reminds you that you were never wrong to love. Only wrong to let that love excuse everything else. It was early August when the invitation came, embossed, elegant, sealed in a white envelope with a silver lining. I knew it was from Amber before I opened it. She had always preferred appearances. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and regret. You are cordially invited to a celebratory dinner in honor of Logan's admission to Columbia Law, it read. Hosted by Nathan and Amber Whitaker. Saturday, 6:30 p.m. Mirabelle Restaurant, San Francisco. No note. No signature. Just that formal script, sterile as a certificate. I stared at it for a moment, then set it aside without comment. Clara arrived that afternoon. She noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter but said nothing until I offered her a slice of blueberry tart. Are you going? She asked, voice even. I haven't decided, I said. She nodded, thoughtful. He'd want you there. Yes, I said. But would he understand if I stayed away? She was quiet for a while. Then, simply, probably. The week passed in a hush. The tide came in higher than usual. I spent the mornings trimming the hydrangeas and the evenings watching light pass over the floor. I didn't mention the dinner to Logan. I didn't ask Clara's opinion again. I waited for the answer to come in its own time, like it always did now. Saturday arrived. I wore gray, not mourning, not celebration. Just the soft, familiar gray of calm. The restaurant was tucked into a quiet street lined with lanterns and potted olive trees. The hostess led me to a long table near the windows, where Nathan and Amber sat at either end like anchors. Logan stood as I approached, kissed my cheek, and pulled out my chair. You came, he said softly. For you, I replied. Amber watched us. She wore a silk blouse and a mask of poise. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass, restless. Dinner passed in polite conversation. Toasts were made. Logan beamed. Nathan made jokes. Amber told a story about Logan's first school play. It was smooth, practiced. And then, as the plates were cleared, she stood. I'd like to say something, she began. All eyes turned. She looked around the table, then at me. I was wrong, she said. I hurt people. Especially you. A pause. Then, voice catching. I'm sorry, Margaret. I said I was disgusted by you. But the truth is, I was ashamed of myself. Thank you for showing me who I'd become. There were murmurs. A few guests shifted in their seats. One woman near the end of the table reached for a napkin. Amber sat down. Her shoulders tightened. Nathan looked over, his expression unreadable. I didn't move. I didn't speak. When the waiter brought dessert, I sipped my tea in silence and let the moment pass through me like wind. After dinner, Logan walked me to the curb. "She meant it," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "Do you forgive her?" I wasn't seeking her apology. He looked down. "But it mattered, didn't it?" I turned to him and smiled, small and quiet. "It mattered that you were there. That you saw me." He hugged me. Longer than usual. Then he said, "See you tomorrow?" "Of course." I watched him walk away, tall and steady, the night closing around him like a curtain. Back at the cottage, Clara was waiting. She had lit the lamp on the porch and left the kettle just beginning to steam. "Well?" she asked. "She spoke," I said. "And?" I placed my purse on the table, took off my shoes, and poured the tea. "She finally understood what she did." Clara tilted her head. "And?" I smiled faintly. "And I let her keep that understanding." She didn't press further. We drank in silence. The wind tapped lightly at the window pane. Ivy the cat stretched across the floor. Outside, the moon rose. And inside, we sat in the kind of peace that needs no explanation. September crept in on quiet feet, cool mornings, golden afternoons, the sea a little louder at night. Clara's studio windows fogged just enough to draw on, and Logan began packing for New York. The cottage smelled of cinnamon and old pages. Life continued in its modest rhythm. One Thursday, I found Clara in the garden with a stack of books and a notebook filled with sketches of plants she couldn't name. She looked up and grinned. "You've got bees living in the fence now," she said, as if announcing royalty had moved in. "Let them stay," I told her. "They don't ask for much." Logan came by that weekend with his suitcase half-zipped and his nerves wound tight. He sat at the table chewing the end of a pencil, pretending to write down last-minute errands, but mostly just circling himself. "You know, you don't have to be perfect there," I said. He glanced up. "I know." "Then why are you trying so hard to act like you don't care about being perfect?" He laughed, short and surprised. "I guess that runs in the family." We spent the day going over little things, banking, recipes, whether New York winters required boots or entire new personalities. Clara made lists for him. I packed snacks. We stood around the car like people do when the real goodbye doesn't fit into a single hug. Before leaving, Logan turned back to me. "She really hasn't changed, has she?" he asked. "No," I said. "But you have." And he had. He looked taller than he ever did before, even when he wasn't standing straighter. After the car pulled away, Clara sat beside me on the porch. She said nothing for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't shown that video?" "Yes." "And?" "I would have stayed quiet. And disappeared a little more each day." She nodded slowly, absorbing that like one might absorb bad weather, something unpleasant but survivable. Later that evening, I opened the old linen chest where I kept my sewing kit, a few letters, and the folded cardigan I'd stopped wearing. I took it out, held it up to the lamplight. The threads were still intact, though the elbows were thinning. I thought about mending them. Then I folded it again, slowly, carefully, and tucked it into a cloth bag. On Sunday morning, I mailed it. No note. No return address. Just a package, soft and familiar, sent to Amber's home. I wasn't giving it to her. I was giving it back. Let her decide what to do with the shape I once occupied. 2 weeks passed without comment. Then, one morning, Clara came in holding a pale blue envelope. "No name on the front," she said. "Just this." Inside was a single piece of paper. Neat handwriting. Short. I never understood what that cardigan meant until it wasn't in the room anymore. That was all. Clara read it twice, then handed it back. "You keeping it?" "No." I folded the note and slid it into the fireplace. It curled, blackened, vanished. Clara didn't ask why. That's how we lived now, in knowing glances, in silences that had grown kind instead of heavy. By early October, the garden had faded to dry leaves and seed husks. We didn't mind. The earth was resting. One evening, Clara brought home an old record player she found at a thrift shop. We sat cross-legged on the floor, listening to Billie Holiday scratch her way through "I'll Be Seeing You." The cat curled between us like punctuation. "I still don't know what to do with the anger sometimes," Clara said. "Don't do anything with it," I replied. "Let it sit beside you. Like a guest who overstayed." She nodded. "And then?" "Eventually, it'll realize it's not being fed and leave." We both smiled at that. Autumn was gentle on the coast. I began writing letters again, not to be sent, just to be written. Notes to my husband. Thoughts for Logan. Little stories I wanted Clara to have one day when I wasn't around to tell them out loud. I wasn't lonely. I was full. Full of the life I chose after everything else was stripped away. And that life, I'd come to understand, didn't require anyone else's permission to be whole. The wind changed in November. You notice that sort of thing more, living by the sea. It stops being background and becomes a kind of conversation, sharp, insistent, different each time it passes. That month, the breeze came colder and quicker, like it had somewhere else to be. I was pulling the last of the dying marigolds from the garden when Logan called. "I booked a flight home for winter break," he said, voice warm through the static. "Mind if I bring a friend?" "You know the rule," I told him. "Anyone who brings kindness is welcome. Anyone who brings laundry must wash it." He laughed, the way he used to as a boy, head thrown back, uninhibited. When he arrived, 2 weeks later, he was taller again somehow. Or maybe just more assured. His friend was a soft-spoken boy named Marcus who played cello and made excellent lentil soup. They stayed in Clara's extra room and spent evenings sprawled on her studio floor, arguing about jazz and justice and which cookies were best eaten frozen. The house felt full in the best way, too many shoes by the door, chipped mugs in the sink, quiet humming through the walls. It reminded me of when Nathan was young, and the house hadn't yet grown rigid around other people's expectations. Clara and Logan grew closer. Not siblings by memory, but something gentler. When she teased him, it was always about something real. When he made her laugh, it was from the belly. She painted him again, this time not from a photo but from memory, half-light across his face, wind in his hair. It hung above the fireplace for weeks. And then, one evening, the past came calling. It happened at Logan's law school welcome dinner, held at a modest restaurant on the coast, not far from where the waves pressed silently against the rocks. Nathan and Amber were there, as were a few of Logan's old classmates and their parents. I had hesitated about attending, but Clara insisted. "It's not about them," she'd said. "It's about you and him." So I wore a simple navy blouse. No cardigan. Just a brooch shaped like a leaf, one Clara had made from clay and gold paint. We arrived early. The room filled slowly, laughter, coats over chairs, hands brushed over tablecloths. Amber arrived last. She looked thinner. Not unwell, but emptied. She wore a dark dress and carried herself like someone trying very hard to appear unburdened. As dinner was cleared, she rose, glass in hand. "I'd like to say something," she said, echoing that night long ago in San Francisco. But this time, her voice was smaller. No spotlight. Just trembling hands and uneven breath. She turned to Logan. "You're becoming the kind of person I once wanted to be. And I couldn't be prouder." Then she looked across the table. At me. "I was wrong," she said. "I hurt people. Especially you." The room went still. "I said I was disgusted by you," she continued, voice catching. "But the truth is, I was ashamed of myself. You reminded me of who I'd forgotten I was, before everything became about hiding." There were murmurs. One woman dabbed her eyes. Amber stepped back from the table, her hands shaking. I'm sorry, Margaret. Thank you for not answering hate with hate. I nodded once. Politely. I didn't stand. I didn't embrace her. Because I wasn't there for redemption. I was there for Logan. The rest of the night passed like low tide, quiet, slow, inevitable. Back at the cottage, Clara asked how I felt. I think she meant it, I said. But meaning it doesn't change what was done. Clara nodded. You don't forgive her? I don't need to. That was never the goal. She didn't press. She didn't offer neat closure. Just poured us each a cup of tea and opened the back door to let the wind in. Logan came by the next morning with a suitcase in one hand and Marcus's scarf in the other. I think she's trying, he said. I believe you. But that's her work now. Not mine. He smiled, gently. I'm glad you came, I added. I'm proud of you. He looked down at the floor, then back at me. I'm proud of you, too, he said. He left after lunch. Clara and I watched the car disappear down the drive. Later that night, I sat on the porch, a blanket around my knees, tea cooling in my hands. I thought about that first night in Palo Alto. About how the air had felt then, polite, tight, edged with performance. And how this night felt now, loose, honest, earned. No performance. Just presence. Just peace. I turned the cup in my hands. Not for warmth. Just to feel its weight. Sunday mornings are slow here. Not the kind of slow that comes from waiting, but the kind that arrives when there's nothing left to prove. Clara usually walks over just before 9, her arms filled with fresh bread or sketches or flowers she's pulled from the roadside. Sometimes Logan joins when he's home. Sometimes it's just the two of us. We don't talk about Amber anymore. Or Nathan. Not because we're pretending they didn't happen, but because they're no longer the center of the story. They're a chapter we've turned, not ripped out, just read and understood. The cottage has settled around me. The books are in their places. The curtains catch the light in the way I like. The sea is always close, never demanding, just present. I bake more often now. Not because I need to, but because it gives my hands something to do when the wind howls and the stove hums. Sometimes, strangers ask why I live alone. They tilt their heads when I say my son doesn't visit, that the house I helped pay for no longer holds a room for me. I see the questions behind their smiles. I don't explain. Because the answer isn't about exile. It's about choice. This little home, this place of tea and chipped mugs, of quiet music and salt-blown windows, it was built not from bricks or blueprints, but from refusal. Refusal to keep shrinking. Refusal to keep excusing cruelty because it came dressed as family. I didn't storm out of their lives. I stepped out of the story they wrote for me. The one where I was a footnote. A resource. A burden softened by memory. Now, I write my own. It's slower. Softer. And it doesn't ask for applause. Just honesty. I see Clara often. Her gallery did well this season, 3 pieces sold, including the one of our porch. She brings over receipts and nervously asks if she's charging too much. I remind her that her work isn't priced in apologies. Logan writes, sometimes calls. He's doing well. He sent a postcard last week, just a drawing of a street lamp and the words, still finding light. I pinned it to the kitchen wall. This morning, as the kettle hissed and the floor creaked beneath my slippers, I thought about that cardigan. The one I folded so many times, the one I wore like armor. I wonder where it is now. Maybe Amber kept it. Maybe she gave it away. Maybe she buried it in a drawer, unable to face what it meant. That's not my concern anymore. Because I no longer carry the weight of making others understand my worth. I simply live it. So when people ask me what changed, what happened, what made me leave, I offer the smallest answer I know. I didn't disappear. I just stepped out of someone else's story and started writing my own.